How's everybody doing? We're still in the fish room. Moving on to a part 2. If you didn't watch part 1 of the fish room tour, go up here in the top corner. I'll put a little link there. Watch part 1 first if you want to see the whole fish room tour. But let's go ahead, let's jump down and just continue our video. If you like it so far, don't forget to hit that like button down below too. It helps me out. So it is the next day. Hopefully you guys appreciate it. I'm going to post both these videos on the same day. So after you watch part 1, you can just jump to part 2. So I finished that video and I finished the first half of the tour yesterday. Today I'm doing some stuff, but I can't finish it until I finish the tour. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But let's go ahead, let's jump into these tanks here. Starting with this bottom tank. In this bottom tank we have a lot of airflow because mostly in here we have just some bristlenose plecos. You can see over in the bottom right corner on the sponge filter there's some adults there. I do think the air is really good for the plecos. They like that kind of faster moving water and it helps filter the tank more. But I think it kind of hurts the guppies a little bit. I'm kind of testing out some things. I have a lot of air pressure in the fish room right now. So I don't really want to restrict the air pump too much and kind of have all these blowing a lot softer air and then have all that back pressure. But I think I'm going to have to do it where I can bleed some air or maybe get another connection to the end of my air pump. And I'm just kind of following this guppy around as I'm talking because she's pretty cool. This is my purple painted guppies. This is actually a female. I love how her top fin is nice and long. She's doing pretty well. Hopefully she'll start having some babies here because she's still pretty small. Not small, but she's a young adult for sure. So she's kind of a prime time to start having babies. But back to the air pressure, the plecos like it. I don't think the guppies like it too much. This tank, I do have plans on rescaping it. Both of these bottom tanks, and that'll be a future video. We're going to get rid of some of this acrylic yarn in these tanks and leave one side open like it is now. I think it's good, just kind of swimming area for the plecos. It's easy to feed there. The algae wafers won't get caught up anywhere. But yeah, there's just some nice big plecos in here. We have a couple albinos, but mostly commons in this tank. A whole bunch of acrylic yarn over here. And that does really well with keeping the tank clear because it grows a lot of bacteria in the waste and kind of settle there. So it's not always being turned around. Just some floating plants and just some fake stuff. And then we have a couple more guppies. Right next to this, while we're down here, I'll show you. This is just a tub of some floating, I think it's water sprite and some duckweed. Just keeping it alive, but it's been down here for about 2 weeks or so. And this is like 8 feet away from these shop lights. And it's not even directly below them. It's barely getting any light, but it's actually growing, doing well. So that's kind of interesting. And I do have a pair of yellow half black guppies in here. You can see the female to the side. I think I have a trio in here. Kind of just want to keep these plants alive meanwhile. And I figure while I'm doing that, may as well throw some guppies in there so they can have babies because there's tons of hiding places. But I think I might move this to another tank or kind of just meanwhile giving myself some more time really that I can decide what I want to do. As for above it, this is one of my tanks I showed earlier. Really good success with the guppy breeding in here. It's a little bit harder to see just because the way the light is. It's a little bit more behind the fish than above or in front of them. You can see how many babies are in this tank. The water sprite is doing really well. I just cleaned this. If you ever have some old lids, I didn't do it this time, but if you ever want to just drop them in the tank, leave them for a few days, the plecos and fish will clean them right up. If they're real dusty, you might just want to clean them. That's what I did. But it looks so much better having a clean lid versus like this needs to be cleaned. Night and day makes your tank look so much better. And you really can see that water sprite. It's grown, like it used to be like a third of the size 2 weeks ago, and it's growing really well. I think it looks good. But yeah, these are the yellow half black guppies. I need to go through and actually start separating some of these guys. But as for right now, I'm just colony breeding them. They're doing pretty well. Here's what you can see like the adults will look like. The males have nice long tails. They get pretty squared off. You'll get different grades of them over time, but those males are looking good. These females are older, but just to get an idea of this tank. Really enjoying this moss. Just growing on top of all this acrylic yarn. I will be pulling some moss from this and kind of rescaping this tank as well. I want to get rid of all this acrylic yarn and this fake plants. But we have some nice plecos in here too. There's a lemon blue eye, if it'll focus in for us, hanging out. That looks like a young female. Behind her you can see the tail of a long fin albino right behind those bubbles to the left. We have some more hanging out down here. There's a nice common, a larger female, that's the blue eye. You can see some babies too if you look closely. Those guys are probably a few weeks old now. There's another one right there. So pretty cool. We have guppies named Plecos breeding in this tank. Maybe even eventually add some shrimp to something like this. But let's go ahead and move our way to the tank right next to it. So here's a pretty similar setup. This is some red guppies and some super red bristlenose plecos for the most part. I do have a variety of different plecos in this tank, but any that are different, like if we come closer here, I do have some of those calicos or red marbles. Having some trouble focusing on this top tank. All right, there we go. That's a little bit better. I kind of adjusted the lights in the room so we can actually look at this tank. But we have same thing, some floating water sprite here. I apologize, that's wisteria. It can be rooted or floating. Super thick. I'm gonna pull from this in the next video and put it in another tank and kind of do some, I wanna tie it to rocks and do a different scape. But this moss is growing super thick. I wanna say it's a Christmas moss, but I'm not positive because down here it looks more like a Java moss. It's a little bit hard to tell, it gets more stringy. But that also might be just because it gets less light down here. But this is just a huge mat of moss. I'm sure underneath there's some dying moss, but I think it looks messy but really cool. Like you can see all the new growth here and it's like that brighter green. But under here we have our Pleco cave. I usually have a male super red hanging out there waiting for females. If you look around, there are a lot of babies in this tank, so they're still currently breeding. There's like a month-old one down here. That one's probably a few weeks old, maybe even a month. They grow super slow, and then like this guy over here might be 2 or 3 months old for all I know. Just kind of letting them colony breed, so it's not like I'm having babies and then separating them, putting them in a tank and marking a date. So I have like, this would be a grow out. That's one of my blue eye plecos. Over here, same thing, another lemon blue eye. More of an albino color, less of the lemon. This one's cool right here. I haven't seen him for a while. That's one of my spotted blue eyes. He's super bright, so it's hard to focus in on him. But you can see that little black spot, at least for a second on him. And there's a nice super red long fin pleco hiding in the sponge filter just a little bit. There's like a red marble or calico, however you'd like to say it. Really excited to finally grow those out and breed them. I have never bred those as adults, so that was kind of a crossbreeding where I got some cool results, and I've been patiently waiting to grow them up and breed them. That's why I haven't been selling as many fish, because I've been holding back most of my fish to grow them up and do some future projects. So it is a patient game, but like this fish right here I think looks amazing. Super cool fish. I can't wait to get these guys a few months older, a little bit bigger, get some size on them, separate them, and start different tanks of breeding. But that fish is just super cool in my opinion. Really excited about those. But moving over to here, a little bit higher up in the tank, you can see some of the guppies. These are the red delta guppies. They're kind of just like an assorted red guppy at this point. Not super concentrated on breeding them to be a certain type of red. I just want them to have nice tails and be relatively hardy. I do find that the red guppies in general are usually a little bit more finicky, so I try to breed my fish to be hardy and still look nice, but this is a good male, good example of what I'm kind of going for here. There are some medium ones hanging out in the plants, but let's go ahead and we'll keep moving to another tank. But this one, if I get real close at, I could do a whole highlight video on just this tank for if you like the plecos, on how many different types of plecos in here and what the sizes are. So just a lot going on in this tank, and here's where most of the guppies are hanging out, probably because they're trying to get away from the current. So I definitely got to turn the current down a little bit more in this tank. But let's go ahead, we're gonna drop down just so you can see what I did here for the video. I stole that shop light from the bottom tank and pulled it up, and then I turned off these top lights because they do kind of brighten the room up really well, but they disperse light so far out here that you just get reflections off the glass. It's hard to see on camera. In person they work great, but let's drop the light back down. We'll continue the video. So as for this bottom tank, there are no live plants, just kind of some fake plants, some flower pots. Mostly here we are just growing out and breeding a little bit of the bristlenose plecos. I did actually add some water sprite up there just today, see if it'll grow in this tank with the new light on it. But let's go closer and look at a few of the plecos in this tank. So here's always one of my favorites, the one on the front of the glass, if she swims away for us. Really nice long fin common female bristlenose pleco. And then behind her in the cave, you can see we have a lemon, I think it's a lemon blue eye male hanging out. I think they're gonna be breeding here shortly because she's been hanging out pretty close to that cave the last week or so. So if I really crank up the food in this tank, hopefully you see her belly get a little bit fatter and fatter, and eventually we'll see some more babies in this tank. But she's really cool. You can see her tail gets a little tethered up from it being so long, but just an awesome fish right there. And I'm so happy I have these lights on. I actually can take a closer look. Over here you can see on that cave back there is like a medium-sized lemon blue eye. Over here we have a younger baby. So you can see they are breeding in here, but there are a lot of adults. So they're probably competing a lot for food. So just taking a look at it right now, and that's why I like doing these videos a lot, taking a close look and talking about these tanks. I notice a lot more things that I didn't notice just the day-to-day base. So by seeing that there are babies in here, which I already knew that, but there's not that many, that tells me that there's not enough food in this tank and they are still breeding. So the Plecos are breeding, they're having babies, but not a lot are making it, maybe because there's too much competition in that tank. Maybe the males are kind of fighting in the caves. There's not enough hiding places or caves, but there are tons of caves in this tank, so I don't think that's really an issue. But hopefully you guys are enjoying this view because these fish are looking really good in my opinion. I love seeing those long fins just kind of cruise around the tank. It never really gets old to me. I think they look amazing. Their fins are super long, and I just really enjoy the long fins. I can't wait till I have some adult super reds and calicos like those ones we looked at just a few minutes ago. Whenever they're this size, those fish, I mean, it's almost hard to sell them because to me they're like priceless. I don't really know what I would charge for a fish like that. I usually give people pretty good deals when I have a bunch of them, but whenever there's not that many, especially when it comes to colors like that, I really don't even want to ship those fish. I want to sell them maybe locally and make sure I have enough of them where I can definitely breed them and never run into any problems where I don't have any. Just 'cause I think they're super cool. Last thing we'll look at in this tank is check out the big old snail. Local friend of mine that breeds the mystery snails, and he looks pretty dirty. His shell's kind of beat up, but he is just massive. I'll put my finger next to him. And this guy's like the size of a golf ball. He's just huge. I have a couple of those spread out in the fish room. You can see there's some ram horn snails. There's a super red bristlenose pleco in there. I just put them in there to kind of spread out the colors. Like right here though, those snails are looking really good. The one's looking really good. They're a nice color when they breed in a tank, but I find anytime you move them from tank to tank, their shell kind of has to like regrow or gets like calcium or something. I forget what the actual term for it is, but whenever they're actually in your tank and they breed in your tank, the babies look super cool and their shells are really nice. But once you start kind of moving around from tank to tank, that's when you kind of get those different looking shells on them, and it's not the best, but still really cool. I always like having snails in a tank because they help eat any leftover fish food, and they make sure nothing really goes to waste in the tank if you overfeed. But I can look at these guys all day. I don't know about you, but we're gonna have to move over to the next tank, take one last good look at the adult longfin, and we got a nice little super red there. Really cool color contrast, and I just can't wait till I have those reds be this big in size and have a lot of them in a tank. I think they look really good. Last Pleco tank we have today, this is a 29-gallon tank, and they just repopulate like crazy in here. A lot of really good looking babies, and this tank's usually dark, so I don't have a light over it. I moved the light over to see them, and once again I'm surprised to see some of the fish I'm looking at right now. So let's go ahead. I'm going to zoom in on this sponge filter over here. I can see a lot of longfin commons. They kind of have like that bright white on the tips of their fin, which I think is really cool. And I really didn't know this tank was producing any longfins. I knew I saw a couple, but right now I'm seeing 10 or 12 right away. So let's take a closer look at these guys. So if you guys would just look closely with me, I might even back up a little bit more. But this tank is, might have a few guppies in this tank, but it's mostly just a bristlenose pleco tank. So it's really high current. There's a lot of fish in here that gets tons of food every day. So it's very dirty too. You can see there's just constant food and debris getting tossed around the tank. But don't worry, the nitrates are low in this tank, and they do well and they thrive. But all that food in there is really good for the babies, so they can all get enough food. But if you look closely here, you can see like this one looks really cool. That's a long fin. It looks like a common, I don't know the right term whenever they have those long tips of color at the end. I do think it adds a lot to the fish. It looks really cool. So there's two side by side there, and they're just kind of grazing away. They're super active right now, which is kind of fun to watch. There's one up on the glass here. Right there, you can see how fat its belly is. It's kind of just grazing away. But it's cool. We have some, like I said, the long fin commons with that color on their fins. We have some albinos in here. I can see an albino at the very end right there. This one over here is a lemon blue eye. So you can see the different in the eye color there. We have some long fin albinos too, if I can find one. So coming over here, you can see there's the adult in the cave. There's a nice big male. I think that's a long fin. You can see very bright, but that's a long fin albino kind of in the silicone of the tank. Really hard to see him. It's almost too bright right now. But there are some long fin albinos and some like mid-length, like this one here. Not a standard fin, but definitely not a long fin. Here, that small one in the center of the screen is a long fin. It's a little bright. I do apologize, and I've said that a few times, but let me see if I can move this around and kind of make this any better. I think it's about to be, I think that's as good as it's gonna get. You can see this back corner. I'll zoom out a little bit and just kind of talk more. But this back corner builds up a huge mound of debris. I have to just, it's really tough because I can't just go net it out because that's where all the new babies are hiding. So it's really dirty and kind of messy. You might want to get rid of all that stuff, but that, in my opinion, that's why this tank is thriving. Whenever I have a tank that's a bare bottom and it's too clean, you really don't get many babies. When you do, you don't get as big of numbers. Like we were just looking through the tank over here, so I'll back up. You can see all the medium-sized babies on the walls and on the sponge filters. You can see like in that flower pot on the very top, there's a tiny, tiny baby, but there's not a whole bunch over here. Once you come a little further away where the current slows down, this is where all the food and extra waste and debris gets kind of pushed to the corner. This is where all the babies are. So if you zoom in a little bit here, just kind of look for motion. I know it's not the best quality right now, but I can see tons of babies, especially a little bit more towards the front. We got like one, there's one right there, one right there. I mean, obviously there's bigger ones. There's some in the debris back there. You can see them swimming around by my finger up there, a little bit further back. But this tank is just full of babies. The tank's doing really well. The more I see the Plecos swim up against the glass, most of them have really big fat bellies. Because I know I overfeed this tank, or not overfeed, but I feed this tank very heavily. And that's probably why it's thriving so much more than my other Pleco tanks. It does have a lot of adults in here, even though you can see a few, but they're not quite as many. For a 29-gallon tank, I've had people ask me, for all different size tanks or all different types of fish, how many fish can I keep in a tank? So let's just count right here, and this isn't even all of them. I can see 1 female, 2, there's a male, there's 3. We know there's 1 in there, 4. 5, you can see the tail, there's 1 hanging out there. I can see an adult off the reflection there, 6. So we have 6, if not, honestly, there might be 9 or 10 adult bristlenose Plecos in this 29-gallon tank, and not even counting the probably 100 babies in here. I feed this tank probably 7 to 10 small algae wafers a day in the morning and night. So we're talking almost 20 algae wafers every single day, which, by the way, if you don't know where to get your algae wafers, or you are trying to breed bristlenose Plecos or grow out the babies, don't buy the bags at the pet store that are like $8 or $10 for 30 big algae wafers. If that, it's usually like over $5, and there's not many wafers in there. I would go through that in like 2 days. I'll put down in the description below a link to the algae wafers I buy. They're by Aquatic Foods. I've been buying from them for probably about 3 years. Really good product. Really good customer service. I had to return a bag of food once out of like the 15 times I've ordered because all the wafers were floating. They said it was a mistake on their part. They had other people let them know, and they took care of it right away. I didn't have to return the food. They just sent me an extra bag, and then I just fed whatever ones were worked, and then the rest I think I crunched up and fed to my guppies anyway. So the food didn't go to waste, and they took really good care of me. But I buy a 5-pound bag for like $40. Lasts me over a month or two, feeding tons and tons of Plecos very heavily. So if you're breeding Plecos or you go through a lot of algae wafers, check them out. They're down in the description. They'll save you a ton of money, especially if you're trying to breed fish. You're going to spend a lot of money on food if you're just buying stuff in small quantity from the pet store. So if you're serious and you want to be able to feed your fish right and not go broke doing it, I suggest looking into the food from that company, and I have no sponsorship or anything with that. It's just a food that I've shopped around for. I like it. I buy my Guppy flake food and I buy my algae wafers from that source. So just something I thought I may as well add. And there are some cool guppies in here too. I just saw this female come down. They like to hang out towards the top, but I also have some guppies in this tank. Not a whole bunch, just a couple. But yeah, long story short, that's a good food to buy. I know I kind of jumped around. And also, you can fit a lot of fish in a tank long as you take good care of the water quality. I do water change on this tank probably every 2 weeks, not even every week like I used to. So every 2 weeks or so, I do like a 50%, maybe like a 60% water change. I do take it down the hose around the area. I put a screen over it and I get a lot of that debris out of there. And every once in a while, maybe every month or two, I'll bring out the sponge filters. But the nitrates in here are definitely not zero by any means, but they're not over like 80 parts per million. So there's definitely some nitrates in here, but the tank's healthy. The fish are still growing, they're breeding, they're doing well. So yeah, if you test your water and you keep a close eye on it, you can really get a lot of fish into an aquarium as long as you know what you're doing. Moving up from that tank, really excited about this tank, and I'm going to be doing an update on it shortly. But this is the no water change aquarium. I've topped it off once or twice, I've added plants, but at this point I'm just going to kind of feed pretty minimal. I add like a third of an algae wafer, like a tiny fraction of an algae wafer to this tank every day. And then I do a very small pinch of flake food. And if we look, here you can see there's a female purple guppy there. She has that longer fin like the one we looked at before, which I thought was pretty unique. There is a male over here. This is like the purple painted. So he's got that squared off tail. He's got some cool pattern to him as well. This tank, I'm always fighting the glare. I'll do a highlight video on this tank. Whenever I do that, I'll turn off some different lights and I'll do a different light on this tank so we can see. But basically it's doing well. We have some of these stem plants growing more. The wisteria is floating and planted. The moss is growing pretty well. We have lots of shrimp in this tank too. They're not breeding yet, but I think I put 10 in here to start. If I can find one of them, we'll try to zoom in on it. They're like my orange shrimp or my, they're not really a cherry shrimp. I can see one back here. It's like right in the middle of the screen, a little bit blurry, but sorry, I don't really feel like moving everything around and kind of disturbing it. But this tank looks really cool from above, especially if I remove this lid here. Tank's doing really well, I think. So I'm gonna do a highlight video on this. We're gonna actually test the water. But so far it's doing well. The plants are growing. The nitrates aren't jumping very high. They're kind of starting to stabilize and go down a little bit, if anything. And I'm just kind of waiting for the shrimp and the guppies to start breeding. But super easy tank. It's got a deep substrate, maybe 3 or 4 inches. And then the plants are doing well. We did like a couple fertilizer tabs to start. We had some established sponge filters, but yeah, got moss, stem plants, Amazon swords, wisteria, more wisteria, some water sprite. And yeah, it's pretty simple, but I definitely like this tank. It's really easy. Moving to the left, this is kind of my shame of a tank, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of good things going on here, but there's definitely been some things that I've just made rookie mistakes on. If you haven't seen the initial videos for this tank, this is my very simple, basic saltwater aquarium. What my goal is here, I want to have just a plain tank with a sponge filter. You would need a heater, but my room is heated. And just how can you keep a saltwater tank as pretty much basic as possible that's not so intimidating? So I think this is going to work, but I have had some troubles. My clownfish we had initially, he did pass away. I think because I only got one. I think if you have two, they're a lot more comfortable and they actually will kind of stay together. I think he got sick, and I think that was part of it, the stress, just being by himself, going from probably a breeder where they had tons in a tank all the time to where he's starting to get older, maybe like looking for a pair, and then I kind of just put him by himself. I thought he'd be fine because clownfish can be relatively aggressive, so I was kind of thinking maybe I'll just have one like boss clownfish in here. It'd be really cool. I'm zooming in down here. We have a hermit crab now, which is kind of going around the corner. He's always super active. I like that guy a lot. But back to the background of this tank. The clownfish did pass away. I almost thought about just leaving the tank, let it kind of cycle itself, even maybe leave the dead fish in there, just give it like a month or two and let it do its thing. But I didn't do that. I pulled the clownfish out. I bought 2 damsels. They did really good for like a month and a half. I had two, they were super active, they would eat every day from day one, had zero issues with them. I bought the hermit crab the same day. The damsels were like $5 each, the hermit crab was like $2 or $3, and they did awesome for weeks and weeks. And then I did get an algae bloom in this tank where you can see a little bit on the walls there, but the rocks got covered, the front of the glass got mostly covered, and the sides. I did eventually clean the front, and everything else I just left. The hermit crab and the tank itself is kind of balanced itself out by itself. So the hermit crab's been grazing away, I fed less food, and if you give it time, the algae will come, the algae will go away. As long as you don't keep overfeeding the tank or you have anything that's off balance or continuously changing. As long as it stays the same, it will eventually kind of fight back and it'll establish itself. But back to where I was going to say, the update of this tank. At the end of the day, we only have the hermit crab because the tank was doing great. My pH was a little bit low, and I always knew that. I wanted to give the tank more time and just kind of see if the fish could kind of tough it out and see if they can make it. But I didn't want to go crazy and start adding tons of buffers, only because this tank is a project tank. I didn't want to do any of that stuff intentionally because I just want it to be really simple. I have other tanks where, yeah, sometimes you have to do that to get it started, but I want to try not to do that. Just stick with using tap water, and I had my Instant Ocean, which has buffers in the salt, which should stabilize it. But long story short, I did a 5-gallon water change because the nitrates were pretty low, but I just wanted to bring the pH up a little bit, so I pre-mixed the water. Long story short, I did a 5-gallon water change. I wrung out the sponge filter a little bit, and the damsels passed away the next day. It was just too much of a change. It shocked them a little bit. I probably changed too much water, and I cleaned the sponge the same day, which I know better. I shouldn't have done that. And also, I probably added the water too fast. I dumped in the tank relatively fast, but it really should have been fine. Couple things I could have done better, but at the end of the day, this tank is still getting cycled. I have the hermit crab in there. I put a little bit of food like every couple days in there just to keep the tank cycled and give the hermit crab something to eat. But I do plan on getting some more clownfish or some more damsels for this tank whenever I have time, really. I've just been a little bit sidetracked on other projects, but let's go ahead. Not to be like this tank is not working right now, but there has been some bumps along the way. And anytime you're setting up a tank, expect some losses. Hopefully you don't have any, and don't just like not care and just let it happen anyways. Like, do your best to not let it happen, but you can't get too discouraged to losing fish because it is part of the hobby and it is such a fragile thing whenever a tank is newly set up. But moving over to the last tank we have here, we'll be quick because I'm going to do a highlight video on this tank by itself, and it's almost too bright to really focus in on. These plants get super bright. They're like a nice bright green color. If you look from above, if I hold the light a little higher up, maybe it'll help dim it down. But right now, I raised out our sponge filter, or our air stone there. I have a little air stone just blowing some bubbles. But holding the light up, everything's growing really well. I mean, this tank's been kind of just doing its thing for a week or two now since I flooded it. The plants are growing. I haven't even added fish yet. I'm going to do some shrimp in this tank soon. Like I said, I want to add some of my albino guppies. If you watched the first part of this tour, I showed those guys. But yeah, I'm really happy with this tank. I'm really proud because I've never done the carpeting tank. I've never done the aquarium seeds. I grew this all from seeds. This cost me like $5 worth of seeds and some substrate I already had. So really cool tank. I do have some sponge filters over here I'm about to put in the tank tomorrow. I talked about that before. I'm making sure I don't have any scuds in them because this is from a different tank that was already cycled. So we're going to let those, I cleaned them a few times. I keep wringing them out, putting them in some more water that's chlorinated to keep the bacteria alive, but not putting any food or anything. I want the scuds to swim out if they're hiding in the sponges, and it also kind of like starve them out so they're not eating food. But that's going to be going in here, probably in the back left corner, maybe just dead center. And I'll put that on those, the double sponge filter. It kind of suctions to the side. They're pretty cool. It's not ideal here. I would like to maybe put a hang on the back filter here, or just do a no filter aquarium where it's just a planted tank. I could do a beta in here, or I could just have the air stone and do some shrimp and guppies, whatever. Those are all kind of options for me. Let me know if you're kind of leaning towards a certain way if you guys want to see something, but I think I'm going to put that sponge filter in the next few days and start adding some shrimp and fish to this tank. But I think that about wraps it up today, guys. So we got a full fish room tour. It was pretty long. I know sometimes I like to sit back and relax and watch a nice long fish room tour video. Hopefully you guys like the same, and hopefully you like the fish room and what I'm doing here. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Go ahead and do that if you like this video. Hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new videos. Doesn't cost you guys anything. It helps me out a whole bunch. And I'll be doing a video here shortly talking about some of my plans for this year, for the 2020 year. Once I get to 10,000 subscribers, I have some big plans. I have a 90-gallon tank. I don't want to spoil it now, but I'm waiting until I get 10,000 subscribers, and I have some big plans for a pretty big tank. It's going to be going somewhere on this wall. I'm going to clean things up, maybe right here. I think it's going to look really cool. I'm not going to give you too much details if it's going to be freshwater, saltwater, planted, not planted, what type of fish. That stuff's all going to be out in the future. But like I said, I'm holding out on that until I get some more subscribers. Been doing videos for about 3 years now. Really enjoy it. Want to get more involved with my actual subscribers. I want you guys to kind of communicate more with me. So let me know what you guys think about that idea. Share this video if you know how to do it and you have friends that might want to watch this stuff. But thanks again, guys. Thanks for watching. Check out these older videos I have on the screen here, and I'll talk to you guys very soon. Thank you.